You avoid pain. That's why you're still weak. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. These words from Joseph Campbell aren't just poetic wisdom. They're a psychological truth that most people spend their entire lives running from. You think you're living, but you're merely surviving. You think you're growing, but you're actually shrinking. And the reason is simple. You've made comfort your god. Every morning you wake up and make the same choice without realizing it. Pain or pleasure, growth or stagnation, the difficult path or the easy one. And every single time, you choose what feels good in the moment, what requires less effort, what keeps you safe in your familiar bubble of mediocrity. You call it self-care. You call it being smart. But what you're really doing is building your own prison, brick by comfortable brick. Look around you. Notice how every modern convenience, every app on your phone, every service you pay for exists for one purpose: to eliminate friction from your life, to remove discomfort, to make things easier. We've created a world where you can order food without talking to a human, find entertainment without leaving your couch, and maintain relationships without genuine vulnerability. We've optimized for comfort, and in doing so, we've optimized away our strength. The ancient Stoics understood something we've forgotten. Adversity isn't something to be avoided. It's the raw material of character. Marcus Aurelius, literally, the most powerful man in the world, spent his private moments writing about embracing difficulty. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This wasn't philosophical posturing from a man in an ivory tower. This was hard-won wisdom from someone who understood that power, real power, comes from your ability to face what others flee from. But here's what's truly disturbing. You know this already. Deep down, in that quiet voice you keep suppressing, you know that your best moments, your proudest achievements, your strongest memories, all came through difficulty. That relationship you fought to save, that goal you struggled to reach, that fear you finally faced. You know that every story worth telling is a story of overcoming something hard. Yet still, you choose the path of least resistance, as if somehow this time will be different. As if comfort will finally deliver the strength that only struggle can provide. And the cost of this comfortable existence? You've become a stranger to yourself. You don't know what you're truly capable of because you've never tested your limits. You don't know your real values because you've never had them challenged. You don't know your authentic voice because you've never had to speak up when it was difficult. You're living a life of perpetual potential, never actualized, never realized, never truly lived. You've traded the possibility of greatness for the guarantee of mediocrity, and you've convinced yourself it was a wise exchange. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this coming over a century ago. He called it the last man, a creature so concerned with comfort, safety, and avoiding pain that he loses all capacity for greatness. "We have invented happiness," says the last man, and he blinks. And here you are, blinking, convinced that your life of calculated mediocrity is actually wisdom. You've been sold the most dangerous lie of modern life, that you can have growth without pain, strength without struggle, character without conflict. It's the ultimate consumer fantasy. All the benefits with none of the costs, like those late-night infomercials promising six-pack abs without exercise or wealth without work. Our entire culture has become an advertisement for effortless transformation. And you bought it completely. Consider your daily choices. When faced with a difficult conversation, you send a text instead. When confronted with physical discomfort, you immediately seek relief. When experiencing emotional pain, you numb it with entertainment, substances, or distractions. When challenged intellectually, you retreat to echo chambers that confirm what you already believe. You've become a master of avoidance, and you call it emotional intelligence. But avoidance isn't intelligence, it's atrophy. Every time you choose the comfortable option, you're making a trade. You're trading your future strength for present ease. You're trading growth for stagnation. You're trading the person you could become for the person you currently are, wrapped in the familiar blanket of your limitations. The psychologist Viktor Frankl who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something profound about human nature. Our capacity to find meaning in suffering is what separates us from mere animals. But more than that, he realized that when we avoid all suffering, we don't eliminate pain, we just make it meaningless. We suffer anyway, but it's the hollow suffering of emptiness rather than the purposeful suffering of growth. Your generation has taken this avoidance to an art form. You've created safe spaces, trigger warnings, and comfort zones that would have been incomprehensible to previous generations, who understood that safety isn't the point of life. Growth is. You've confused being protected with being prepared. You've mistaken avoiding challenges for avoiding failure. But here's the paradox. By trying to avoid all pain, you've guaranteed a life of the worst kind of pain, the pain of unrealized potential. And this avoidance has created something even more insidious, a culture of victimhood masquerading as empowerment. You've learned to wear your limitations like badges of honor, to make your inability to handle difficulty into an identity. You've turned weakness into a virtue and called strength toxic. You've made resilience problematic and fragility fashionable. But deep down, beneath all the social media posts and therapeutic language, you know the truth. You're not empowered by your limitations. You're imprisoned by them. You're not protected by your safe spaces. You're weakened by them. And the very system that promises to care for your emotional well-being is systematically destroying your capacity to care for yourself. Carl Jung understood something about the human psyche that modern psychology has largely forgotten. Integration requires confrontation. You cannot become whole by avoiding your shadow, and you cannot become strong by avoiding what makes you uncomfortable. The very things you run from are the things that contain your power. Think about a muscle. How does it grow? Through resistance, through being broken down and rebuilt, through stress that would be considered damage in any other context. Your character works the same way. Every difficult conversation you avoid is a missed opportunity to develop communication skills. Every physical challenge you sidestep is a chance to build resilience that you'll never get back. Every emotional difficulty you numb is a lesson in strength that remains unlearned. But there's something even more insidious happening. By constantly avoiding pain, you're not just failing to grow, you're actively becoming weaker. Like a muscle that atrophies from disuse, your capacity to handle difficulty diminishes every time you choose comfort over challenge. You become more sensitive, more fragile, more dependent on external conditions for your well-being. You've turned yourself into a delicate flower that wilts at the first sign of harsh weather. The great paradox is this. The more you try to protect yourself from pain, the more painful your life becomes. When you have no tolerance for discomfort, every minor inconvenience becomes a crisis. When you can't sit with difficult emotions, every setback becomes traumatic. When you haven't developed resilience through voluntary hardship, involuntary hardship, which life will inevitably deliver, becomes overwhelming. Ancient traditions understood this deeply. The Spartans didn't coddle their children because they were cruel. They understood that hardship early in life creates strength later in life. Buddhist monks don't embrace asceticism because they hate pleasure. They understand that voluntary discomfort leads to freedom from the tyranny of comfort. Native American vision quests weren't hazing rituals. They were recognition that transformation requires stepping into the unknown and uncomfortable. Modern neuroscience validates what these traditions knew intuitively. Your brain changes based on the challenges you face. When you consistently choose difficult tasks, your neural pathways strengthen. When you repeatedly avoid discomfort, those same pathways weaken. You're literally rewiring your brain for either strength or weakness with every choice you make. And most of you are choosing weakness without even realizing it. Here's the deeper truth that no one talks about. Suffering isn't the enemy of happiness, it's the pathway to it. Not the mindless suffering of victimhood, but the conscious suffering of growth. The deliberate choice to face difficulty because you understand that on the other side of every challenge is a stronger version of yourself. Every great story, every meaningful life, every person you admire has one thing in common. They faced their dragons instead of running from them. They understood that the treasure isn't in avoiding the cave, it's in what you become by entering it. But the modern world has convinced you that you're fragile, that you need protection, that difficulty is pathological rather than necessary. You've been taught to interpret every challenge as trauma, every discomfort as injustice, every obstacle as evidence that something is wrong. But what if nothing is wrong? What if this is exactly how it's supposed to be? What if the difficulties you face aren't bugs in the system, they're features? So what does strength actually look like? It's not what you think. Strength isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling fear and acting anyway. Strength isn't the absence of pain, it's the ability to transform pain into power. Strength isn't never falling down, it's getting up every time you fall. And the only way to develop this strength is to voluntarily enter the cave you've been avoiding. Start small, but start today. Take a cold shower. Have that difficult conversation you've been postponing. Exercise until it's uncomfortable, then do one more rep. Sit with anxiety instead of immediately distracting yourself. Say no to something you want but don't need. Say yes to something you need but don't want. These aren't random acts of self-punishment. They're deliberate exercises in expanding your tolerance for discomfort. The Stoics had a practice called voluntary discomfort, deliberately choosing harder options to build resilience. Sleep on the floor occasionally, walk instead of drive, fast for a day, wear lighter clothing in cold weather. These practices weren't about suffering for suffering's sake. They were about building what they called the discipline of desire, the ability to want what you have rather than always having what you want. But here's the deeper truth. Once you start voluntarily facing discomfort, something magical happens. You realize that most of your fears were paper tigers. That difficult conversation you were dreading, it wasn't that bad. That physical challenge you were avoiding, you were stronger than you thought. That emotional pain you were numbing, it had something to teach you. You begin to understand that you've been living in a prison of your own making, and the door was never locked. People who embrace difficulty become different kinds of human beings. They develop what the psychologists call anti-fragility. They don't just survive stress, they get stronger from it. They become the people others turn to in crisis because they've developed the rare ability to remain calm when everything is falling apart. They become leaders not because they seek power, but because they've developed the strength that naturally attracts others. But this transformation isn't just about becoming tougher, it's about becoming more alive. When you stop avoiding life's difficulties, you stop avoiding life itself. You discover capacities within yourself that you never knew existed. You find reserves of strength you didn't know you had. You develop a relationship with challenge that transforms it from enemy to ally, from obstacle to opportunity. The irony is profound. By seeking to avoid all pain, you guarantee a life of chronic suffering. By voluntarily embracing appropriate difficulty, you develop the capacity for genuine joy. The person who can handle anything life throws at them is free in a way that the person hiding from life never can be. They don't need life to be perfect, to be happy. They've developed the strength to find happiness regardless of circumstances. This is what the ancient philosophers understood that we've forgotten. Freedom isn't the absence of constraints, it's the strength to transcend them. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the ability to remain centered in the midst of it. Happiness isn't the presence of pleasure, it's the capacity to find meaning in any experience, even the difficult ones. The choice is yours, but understand what you're choosing between. You can continue on your current path, avoiding pain, seeking comfort, gradually weakening until life forces challenges on you that you're unprepared to handle. Or you can start today, taking voluntary steps into discomfort, building strength through struggle, becoming the kind of person who doesn't just survive life's inevitable difficulties, but transforms them into stepping stones to greatness. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. But here's what Campbell didn't tell you. The treasure isn't gold or fame or external success. The treasure is you, the version of yourself that emerges only through the alchemy of adversity, the person you become when you stop running from pain and start running toward it. Your weakness isn't your fault, but your strength is your responsibility. And it starts with the next difficult thing you choose to do instead of avoid. The question isn't whether life will test you, it will. The question is whether you'll be ready when it does. The answer to that question is being written right now, in this moment, by the choice you make next.